My name is Evelyn Mercer. I'm 68 years old, a widow, a mother, and one of the founders of Mercer Cold Chain Logistics. For most of my life, I was the person my family called when something needed fixing. Then my only son decided that meant I belonged to him. Adrian came to my house and demanded $5 million. I was running a fever so high that standing made the room tilt beneath me. When I refused to release the money without seeing the documents behind his request, he opened the beer in his hand and poured it over me. It ran through my hair, soaked my nightgown, and splashed across the kitchen floor. Then he looked at me and said, "Now get up and clean it up, you poor old lady." So I did. I lowered myself onto my knees and wiped my son's beer from the floor while he stood over me. But that wasn't the part Adrian should have remembered. He should have remembered what I did after he left. Because today, that same son is no longer demanding anything from me. He is begging me for help. I wish I could tell you that hearing him beg brought me satisfaction. It didn't. No mother raises a child hoping to watch him fall apart. Even after everything Adrian did, part of me still wanted to reach through the phone and tell him I would make the danger disappear. That instinct had controlled me for years. It was also the reason he believed he could humiliate me in my own home and still expect $5 million by morning. What Adrian didn't understand was that his position, his authority, and the life he had built all depended on something he had just destroyed: my trust. Before I tell you about the decision I made that night, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and like the video. This is a community for people who understand that loving someone does not mean allowing them to destroy you. Now let me take you back to the evening my son made the worst mistake of his life. My fever had climbed above 102 degrees by late afternoon. Every joint hurt. My skin felt cold even beneath 2 blankets, and the medicine beside my bed had done little except make my mouth dry. I had canceled every appointment and ignored most of the calls coming through my phone. All I wanted was sleep. Then someone began pounding on my front door, not knocking, pounding. I knew it was Adrian before I reached the hallway. Nobody else treated my closed door like a personal insult. I held the wall as I walked, waiting for the dizziness to settle before opening it. Adrian stood on the porch in his office clothes, his tie loosened and his jaw tight. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He didn't seem surprised by my pale face or the blanket wrapped around my shoulders. "We need to talk," he said. "I'm sick. This can't wait." He moved past me before I invited him inside. That should have warned me. Adrian had been impatient before, but this was different. His movements were too sharp. He kept checking his phone as if every passing minute were costing him something. I followed him into the kitchen. He opened my refrigerator, took out one of the beers left from a board dinner, and twisted off the cap. Then he placed a thin folder on my kitchen table. "I need $5 million transferred from your personal trust." For a moment, I thought the fever had affected my hearing. "How much?" $5 million. He said it as casually as if he were asking to borrow my car. I lowered myself into a chair. "What is it for?" "A short-term investment." "In what?" "A development opportunity. The details aren't important right now." "If you need $5 million, the details are the only thing that matters." His jaw tightened. "I need the transfer authorized tonight," he said. "The money has to be available tomorrow morning." I looked at the folder, but he kept one hand resting on top of it. "Then leave the documents with me. I'll have them reviewed." "There isn't time for that." $5 million requires time. It's my company too. "No," I said carefully. "You are the company president. That does not make my personal trust company property." His eyes hardened. For years, I had allowed Adrian to speak about Mercer Cold Chain as if it already belonged to him. I told myself it gave him confidence. After his father died, I thought placing him in leadership would help him grow into the responsibility. Instead, he had begun treating responsibility like inheritance. He leaned toward me. "That money will come to me eventually." The sentence chilled me more than the fever. "You are asking me to sign away $5 million without showing me what I'm funding." "I'm telling you it's secure." "Then proving that should be easy." His phone vibrated again. He looked at the screen and rejected the call so quickly that I barely saw the movement. That was when I understood that he wasn't offering me an opportunity. He was facing a deadline. "What happens tomorrow morning?" I asked. "Nothing if you make the transfer." "And if I don't?" He lifted the beer bottle to his mouth and took a long drink. "You always have to make everything difficult. I'm asking you a simple question, and I gave you an answer. No, you gave me pressure." His expression changed. The polished executive disappeared. What remained was a frightened man who had convinced himself that anger could still force the world to obey him. "You have spent your whole life pretending money doesn't matter," he said, "living in this old house, wearing the same clothes, driving that ancient car. What are you saving it for? That is not your decision. I'm your son. That does not make you my owner." The silence between us lasted only a second, but something in Adrian broke. He stepped closer, still holding the beer. "Dad would have trusted me. Your father would have read the documents." His face twisted. Before I could move, he lifted the bottle and threw the beer directly at me. The first splash struck my face. The rest poured over my hair and shoulders. I gasped as the cold liquid soaked through my nightgown. My hand caught the table, keeping me from slipping out of the chair. Beer dripped from my chin onto the floor. Adrian stared at me. For one brief moment, I thought he might realize what he had done. I thought I might see shock, regret, or even shame. Instead, he gave me a small, contemptuous smile. "Now get up and clean it up, you poor old lady." He placed the empty bottle on my table. Then he stepped back and waited. I wish I could say I threw him out immediately. I wish I could say I called the police, shouted at him, or demanded an apology. I didn't. I reached beneath the sink and took out a cloth. My knees shook as I lowered myself to the floor. The fever made the room sway, and I had to place one hand against the cabinet to steady myself. Adrian watched me wipe the beer from the tiles. That reaction didn't begin that night. It had been trained into me through years of protecting him. Whenever Adrian made a mistake, I reduced the damage. Whenever his father became disappointed, I softened the consequences. Whenever Adrian overspent, missed a deadline, or offended someone important, I found a quiet way to restore peace. I told myself I was keeping my family together. What I had actually taught my son was that his mother would always clean the floor. I rinsed the cloth beneath the faucet. My hands were trembling, but my voice was steady when I finally turned toward him. "You should leave." He picked up the folder. "You'll change your mind by morning." "No, you always do." Then he walked out of my kitchen. The front door closed. I stood alone beneath the kitchen light, soaked, feverish, and staring at the clean floor. Adrian believed he had won because I hadn't fought back. He believed my silence meant weakness. He believed that by morning, fear and guilt would convince me to send him $5 million. I changed out of my wet nightgown. I placed the cleaning cloth in the trash. Then I returned to the kitchen and sat at the same table where my son had tried to intimidate me. His empty beer bottle was still there. Beside it sat my phone. For 5 years, I had protected Adrian from every consequence I could reach. That night, I made a different decision. I would not give him the money. I would not hide what he had done, and I would never again allow him to use my love as permission. I unlocked my phone and opened the contact of the one person who had warned me not to ignore the numbers. Then I pressed call. By the time the sun rose, everything Adrian believed belonged to him was about to change. Naomi Reyes answered before the second ring finished. "Evelyn?" She sounded alert, as if she had never gone to bed. That was Naomi. She had served as chief financial officer of Mercer Cold Chain for 11 years, and I had never known her to ignore a number that refused to make sense. "I need you to tell me exactly what you found," I said. There was a short silence. "You sound sick." "I am. Tell me anyway." I heard papers moving on her end. Earlier that day, Naomi had left me a careful message about irregular payments connected to a warehouse improvement program. I had planned to call her after my fever came down. Adrian's demand changed that. "The payments were approved in separate amounts," she said. Each one stayed beneath the level that would have triggered a full board review. Individually, they look ordinary. Together, they don't. How much money are we discussing? I don't know yet. I stopped after I realized some of the vendors may be connected. Connected to whom? Another silence. Adrian. I closed my eyes. The fever pressed behind them, but that was not why I felt unsteady. Could he alter the records? I asked. Not the bank's records, but he still has administrative access to internal accounts, vendor files, and executive email. How long would it take to preserve everything? If legal authorizes it, we can begin tonight. That word legal made the situation real in a way Adrian's anger had not. For decades, Mercer Cold Chain had been inseparable from my family. Thomas and I built it when refrigerated medical transport was still a small regional business. He understood engines and routes. I understood contracts, cash flow, and the quiet details that determined whether a growing company survived. We began with 2 rented trucks. By the time Thomas died, we had distribution centers across 3 states and hundreds of employees who depended on us to make careful decisions. Adrian grew up inside that company. As a child, he drew pictures at the corner of my desk while I reviewed invoices. As a teenager, he spent summers in the warehouses. He knew the drivers by name and could describe every route before he was old enough to operate one of the trucks. I had believed that familiarity would become stewardship. After Thomas died, I made Adrian president earlier than several independent directors recommended. I told them he understood the company because he had lived beside it his entire life. What I did not say was that I was terrified of losing him too. I had already buried my husband. I could not bear the thought of telling my son that his father's chair was not automatically his. So when Adrian made mistakes, I corrected them quietly. When directors questioned his judgment, I defended his potential. When he spent too much, moved too quickly, or dismissed concerns he did not want to hear, I stood between him and the full weight of the consequences. Each time, I called it patience. Adrian learned to call it permission. Evelyn, Naomi said. I looked at the empty beer bottle on my table. Preserve the records, I told her. I need authorization. You'll have it. If we do this, he will know. I understand. And if the payments are what I think they are, we won't be able to handle this as a family matter. That sentence reached the part of me that still wanted to protect him. For years, family matter had meant secret. It meant no reports, no witnesses, and no consequences that could not be softened behind closed doors. I looked down at the clean kitchen floor. It stopped being a family matter when company money became involved. I said, make the copies. When the call ended, I contacted corporate counsel. By then, my hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped the phone. I could not tell whether the fever or fear was responsible. It did not matter. For the first time since Thomas died, I was no longer asking how to protect Adrian. I was asking how to protect everyone else from him. Corporate counsel listened without interrupting. I described Naomi's findings. I explained Adrian's demand, the deadline he refused to explain, and the folder he would not let me review. I also disclosed the beer incident because I knew concealing it would repeat the same pattern I was trying to end. When I finished, counsel did not comment on Adrian as my son. The questions were procedural. Did Adrian still have access to company banking? Yes. Could he authorize vendor changes? Yes. Was he capable of deleting internal records? Not permanently, but he could make the investigation harder. Did the board possess grounds for an emergency meeting? If Naomi's preliminary evidence was accurate, yes. You cannot suspend him by yourself, counsel reminded me. I know. Owning 62% of the voting shares gave me enormous authority, but it did not turn Mercer Cold Chain into my private kingdom. The board controlled executive appointments. Banks required formal resolutions. Reporting obligations did not disappear because the suspected executive was my son. That distinction mattered. If I had acted alone, Adrian could have claimed I was a sick, grieving mother using company power to punish him after an argument. If the board acted on preserved evidence, he would have to answer the evidence. Counsel contacted the independent directors. Naomi began securing accounting exports and vendor histories. Information technology prepared to preserve Adrian's company email and restrict administrative changes if the board approved. No one promised me a particular outcome. They promised only that the records would survive the night. While they worked, I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of water and the thermometer beside me. The house was silent. Thomas and I had bought it before Adrian was born. Every room carried some small piece of our family: the marks on a doorway where we measured Adrian's height, the cabinet Thomas repaired badly but proudly, the kitchen table where we celebrated school grades and signed the first loan papers for Mercer Cold Chain. Adrian had mocked the house that night. He saw worn cabinets and an old car in the driveway. He did not understand that I stayed because this was the last place where our family had once felt ordinary. For years, I had confused preserving those memories with preserving Adrian from responsibility. At 2 a.m, corporate counsel called back. The directors had reviewed Naomi's preliminary summary. An emergency meeting would begin shortly after sunrise. Until then, silent preservation measures were authorized. No one would confront Adrian before the records were secured. There is one more decision, counsel said. If the board suspends him, do you intend to support the resolution? I looked toward the hallway where Adrian's childhood photographs still hung. This was the moment when I could have retreated. I could have claimed the fever had confused me. I could have asked everyone to wait. I could have called Adrian and warned him, giving him time to build another explanation. That was what the old version of me would have done. The old version of me believed that good mothers prevented their children from falling. But Adrian was no longer a child, and preventing his fall now required placing hundreds of innocent people beneath him. If the evidence supports suspension, I said, I will vote for it. I did not sleep after that. Shortly before sunrise, Naomi sent confirmation that the critical records had been preserved. Adrian still believed he was waiting for a bank transfer. What waited for him instead was an emergency board meeting. The meeting began by secure video because I was too ill to leave the house. I wore a clean robe and tied my damp hair away from my face. The fever remained, but the medicine had lowered it enough for me to think clearly. Naomi appeared first. Corporate counsel joined next, followed by the independent directors. Adrian entered last. He was calling from his office. Behind him, I could see the framed photograph of Thomas that had once hung in my husband's office. Adrian looked rested, polished, and completely certain that the meeting concerned the $5 million. I assume Mother explained the timing, he said. No one answered. Corporate counsel stated that unusual payments and undisclosed related party transactions had been identified. The board had been called to determine whether immediate protective action was necessary. The confidence disappeared from Adrian's face. What transactions? He asked. Naomi presented only what had been verified overnight. Multiple vendor payments had been divided beneath approval thresholds. Several vendors shared contact, registration, or banking connections with entities associated with Greyhaven Development. Adrian interrupted her. That is an operational matter. Then why was the relationship not disclosed? One of the directors asked. Because there is no relationship. Naomi is making assumptions. Naomi did not react. The records are available for independent examination. Adrian looked at me. This is what you did last night? I authorized the records to be preserved. Because we argued? Because the company's chief financial officer found transactions she could not verify. You don't understand what you're looking at? That sentence might have worked on the mother who cleaned his mistakes in private. It did not work in front of a board reviewing evidence. Corporate counsel explained the proposed resolution. Adrian would be suspended as president pending an independent forensic audit. His access to company banking, financial systems, vendor administration, email, and facilities would be restricted. An interim reporting structure would protect ongoing operations. Adrian stared at the screen. You cannot be serious. The independent directors voted in favor. Then it was my turn. My throat hurt. My skin burned. Somewhere beneath all of that, I could still feel the cold beer striking my face. In favor, I said. The resolution passed. Adrian moved toward his computer as though he could still stop what had already begun. His screen flickered. Company access had been disabled. He reached for his phone. Naomi's own phone lit up seconds later with confirmation from the bank. Adrian's signing authority had been suspended under the board resolution. The security system deactivated his executive access badge. Internal administrators secured his files. The outside forensic team received authorization to begin work. Everything Adrian had treated as personal property, his office, his title, his financial access, his ability to order people around, had depended on institutional trust. That trust was gone. He called me the moment the meeting ended. I almost let it ring. Then I answered. "What have you done?" he demanded. "The board suspended you." "You control the board." "No, the evidence controlled the vote." "You made me look like a criminal because I asked for help. You asked for $5 million and refused to explain why. This company is supposed to be mine." There it was again. Not responsibility, ownership. "It was never yours," I said. "You were trusted to lead it." His breathing changed. "Reverse the vote." "I can't." "You mean you won't? Both are true." He lowered his voice. "You have no idea what you've started." "Then tell the auditors." He ended the call. For several minutes, I sat with the silent phone in my hand. The previous evening, Adrian had looked down at me on my kitchen floor and called me a poor old lady. By 9 o'clock the next morning, his access card no longer opened the building he believed he owned. But his suspension was not the end of the story. It was the moment the real story became visible. The first audit findings arrived 3 days later. By then, my fever had begun to break. I could sit through meetings without gripping the table, although Naomi still ended every call by ordering me to rest. The auditors began with the warehouse improvement payments. Mercer Cold Chain required continual upgrades, refrigeration systems, backup generators, loading equipment, security monitoring. Adrian had used that ordinary spending to hide extraordinary transfers. No single payment was large enough to attract immediate board attention. He divided contracts into smaller invoices, shifted descriptions, and routed them through 3 vendors that appeared independent. They were not. The vendors shared addresses, account contacts, and financial links with Greyhaven Development, Adrian's private luxury redevelopment company. Greyhaven had been presented to me as a successful side investment. Adrian had described it as proof that he could build something without relying on Mercer Cold Chain. The audit showed the opposite. Greyhaven was over-leveraged. Construction costs had climbed, projected investors had withdrawn, and the private lender financing the development had demanded additional collateral. Adrian had responded by using Mercer Cold Chain as an invisible source of cash. The first confirmed total was just over $2 million. Then the auditors found additional invoices. $2 million became 2.9, then 3.4. By the end of the first week, the amount Adrian had diverted reached $3.8 million. I stared at the number on the audit summary, $3,800,000. Money intended for company facilities, equipment, operating reserves, and the protection of hundreds of jobs had been redirected to preserve Adrian's private development. Naomi watched me across the conference screen. "There is more," she said. The words felt impossible. She displayed a loan notice obtained from Greyhaven's records. Adrian had personally guaranteed a bridge loan that was reaching its enforcement deadline. Unless he produced another $1.2 million, the lender could begin seizing collateral and examining the development's source of funds. That was the deadline he had refused to explain in my kitchen. The calculation was painfully simple. He needed $3.8 million to replace what he had taken from Mercer Cold Chain. He needed another $1.2 million to stop the private lender from pulling apart Greyhaven's finances. Together, the numbers totaled exactly $5 million. Adrian had not come to my home with an investment opportunity. He had come looking for enough money to refill one hole and cover another before anyone noticed either one. If I had signed the transfer, the company accounts might have appeared whole by morning. Gray Haven's lender would have received its payment. Adrian could have portrayed my money as a family investment and continued operating as if nothing had happened. He had expected me to rescue him before I understood what I was rescuing him from. That realization hurt more than the number. He had targeted me while I was ill because he needed speed, not consent. He had withheld the documents because the documents would have exposed him. When I resisted, he had not lost control because he felt rejected by his mother. He had lost control because his plan was collapsing. The board asked corporate counsel what came next. The answer was not dramatic. It was methodical. The auditors would continue tracing every transaction. The company would notify its insurer and lenders as required. Accounts connected to the suspect vendors would remain frozen. Gray Haven's lender would be informed that Mercer Cold Chain had not authorized the private development's use of company funds. If the evidence established falsified records or intentional diversion, the company could not conceal it. Adrian called before that meeting ended. I declined the call. He called again. Then he sent a message claiming the transfers were temporary advances that he had always intended to repay. A second message blamed Naomi for misunderstanding a complicated expansion strategy. A third reminded me that Thomas had wanted him to inherit the company. He did not ask whether I was recovering. He did not mention the beer. He did not apologize. Even after losing access, Adrian still believed the central problem was that I had stopped cooperating. Adrian spent the next 2 weeks trying to change the story. He contacted directors individually and described the suspension as an emotional overreaction by a grieving mother. He told senior employees that Naomi was staging a power grab. He suggested that my fever had affected my judgment and that the board had acted before hearing his explanation. But whenever someone asked for that explanation, he returned to the same vague phrases: temporary advance, strategic investment, family authorization. He produced no board approval. He produced no signed investment agreement. He produced no legitimate reason for hiding Gray Haven's connection to the vendors. When attacking the evidence failed, he returned to attacking me. "You are destroying Dad's legacy," he said during one call. I was sitting in Thomas's old study when he said it. "Your father's legacy includes the people who work here," I replied. His legacy was supposed to come to me. He wanted you to earn responsibility. "You've always believed I wasn't good enough for him." The accusation reached exactly where he intended. Adrian had spent much of his life trying to impress Thomas. My husband loved him, but Thomas was not an easy man to please. He expected preparation, honesty, and patience. Adrian possessed ambition, but he often treated those other qualities as obstacles. After Thomas died, I tried to give Adrian the approval he could no longer receive from his father. I gave him a title. I defended his decisions. I allowed him to believe that the company's future had already been promised to him. "I never thought you were not good enough," I said. "I thought you needed time." "Then give me time now." Time does not erase records. $5 million would stabilize everything. It would hide what happened. It would protect the company. The company is being protected from what you did. He ended the call. That night, I cried for the first time since the beer incident, not because I regretted the audit. I cried because part of what Adrian said was true. My choices had helped create his certainty. I had handed him authority before he developed accountability, then protected him whenever the difference became visible. Recognizing my responsibility did not make his actions my fault, but it did mean I had to stop repeating them. Gray Haven's lender issued a default notice. Without company money or my $5 million, Adrian could not satisfy the bridge loan. The development's accounts were restricted, and its primary property moved toward foreclosure. His calls changed after that. The anger remained, but panic began breaking through it. He stopped telling me I could not do this to him. He started telling me what would happen if I did not stop it. He would lose the development. He would lose his home. He would lose everything he had worked for. Each statement carried the same unspoken demand: prevent this consequence too. I listened, and every maternal instinct in me begged for a compromise. Then I remembered the company employees whose savings, mortgages, and families depended on decisions they had not made. I remembered Naomi risking her career to report the irregularities. I remembered the cold beer running down my face while Adrian waited for me to kneel. I will not interfere with the investigation, I told him. His voice turned cold again. Then whatever happens next is on you. For most of my life, those words would have controlled me. This time, I understood them for what they were. One more attempt to hand me the cost of his decisions. The audit continued without caring who Adrian's father had been. Cloud accounting records showed when invoices were created and edited. Banking logs showed whose credentials authorized payments. Vendor files showed that addresses and contact numbers had been changed after compliance questions were raised. The most damaging evidence came from Adrian's own email. He had directed employees to separate related invoices so they would remain beneath review limits. He had instructed a Greyhaven contact to avoid using the development company's name in communications with Mercer Cold Chain. He had discussed replacing the money after a new investor entered the project. The investor never arrived. The money was never replaced. Naomi had not misunderstood a complex strategy. She had identified a concealed one. During the third week, the independent directors received the full preliminary report. I watched their expressions change as the auditors moved from one record to the next. No single dramatic document exposed Adrian. It was the consistency of the evidence. Every invoice led to a bank entry. Every bank entry led to an affiliated account. Every account led back to Greyhaven. Every attempt to bypass review carried Adrian's authorization. When the presentation ended, one director asked the question I had been avoiding. Are we required to report this? Corporate counsel answered carefully. Given the amount, the falsified vendor information, the potential lender exposure, and the interests of other shareholders, the company could not treat the matter as an internal employment dispute. The board authorized formal recovery proceedings and compliance with all legal reporting obligations. I voted in favor. My hand remained raised for only a few seconds. The consequences of that vote would last much longer. Afterward, Naomi stayed on the call. "Are you all right?" she asked. "No." It was the first honest answer I had given anyone in days. You can still be his mother without changing what the board had to do. He won't see it that way. Not yet. Mercer Cold Chain moved into stabilization mode. The board created a temporary leadership structure. Naomi tightened approval controls. Operations managers received assurance that payroll, medical deliveries, and facility upgrades would continue. I returned to limited board work while the company searched for independent leadership. I did not reclaim daily control permanently. The purpose was to steady the company, not replace one family-centered authority with another. Employees had already heard pieces of Adrian's version. Some were frightened, others were angry. I refused to answer his accusations with private details the investigation had not yet released. We communicated only what could be verified. Adrian was suspended, operations were secure, and no employee would be punished for cooperating with the auditors. That restraint mattered. Adrian wanted a public family war because emotion was the only ground on which he could still make us appear equal. The records were not emotional. They did not care that he was my son. They did not care that I had once promised Thomas I would keep our family together. They showed what happened. By the end of the month, Adrian's lawyers stopped denying that the transfers had benefited Greyhaven. Their argument changed. They began claiming that I had orally approved the arrangement as a family investment. That claim was false, but it created one final opening for Adrian. If he could persuade me to confirm it, he could cloud the question of intent. He might still lose his job and development, but he could portray the transactions as badly documented family financing rather than deliberate diversion. The money was no longer his only escape. My signature had become just as valuable. Adrian asked to meet in person. Corporate counsel advised against meeting alone, so I agreed to see him in a conference room at counsel's office. The lawyers remained nearby, but the conversation itself belonged to us. When Adrian entered, I almost did not recognize him. His suit was wrinkled. He had lost weight. The confidence that once filled every room had collapsed into exhaustion. For one dangerous second, I saw the little boy who used to fall asleep beneath my desk while Thomas and I worked late. Then he placed another folder on the table, just like the first one. "I need your help," he said. There was no command in his voice this time. I waited. "Greyhaven's lender is moving against the property. The company is demanding repayment. My lawyers say this can still be contained." "How?" He pushed the folder toward me. Inside was a prepared statement. It described the Mercer cold chain transfers as part of a family-backed investment strategy. It claimed I had given prior oral approval while the formal documents were being completed. My name appeared beneath an empty signature line. "This isn't true," I said. "It reflects what was supposed to happen." "You never told me about the transfers." "Because I planned to replace the money. That does not make this statement true." He leaned forward. "If you sign it, the board can treat the money as an authorized advance. The board is not required to accept a false statement from me, but it creates doubt. It gives everyone room to negotiate. It gives you room to deny what you did." His face tightened, but he controlled himself. "Then give me the $5 million as a documented loan. We can restore every dollar. No employee loses anything. The company remains whole. And the false invoices? A mistake. The hidden vendor connections? Bad judgment. The instructions to divide payments?" He looked away. "I was under pressure. You were also in control. You think I don't know that?" His voice cracked. It was the first genuine emotion I had heard from him that was not anger. "I'm going to lose everything," he said. "I know." "Then how can you sit there?" Because I had spent years standing between him and that sentence. Because every time he said he would lose everything, I surrendered something of mine to prevent it. Money, credibility, peace, dignity. This time, he was asking for the truth. "What exactly are you asking me to save?" I said. "Your home, your development, your position, or the belief that none of your choices should be allowed to reach you?" "I am asking my mother to help me." "Helping you would mean telling the truth. Telling the truth will send me to prison." The room became very still. Until that moment, neither of us had said the possibility aloud. I looked at my son and felt the full weight of being his mother. I remembered holding him through childhood fevers. I remembered his first day at the warehouse. I remembered Thomas placing a hand on his shoulder and telling him that the family name was a responsibility, not a guarantee. Adrian saw my hesitation. He reached across the table. "Dad would not have let this happen to me." I pulled my hand back. "Your father would never have asked me to lie. You don't know that. I knew him for 42 years. And I'm your son. Yes. Does that mean anything to you?" The question hurt because the answer was still yes. It meant I would grieve whatever happened to him. It meant I would wake during the night wondering whether one different decision in his childhood could have changed the man sitting across from me. It meant part of me would always want to save him. But it did not mean I could convert love into false evidence. "I love you," I said, "but I will not give you $5 million to conceal what you did. I will not sign a statement that is untrue, and I will not ask the board, the lenders, or the investigators to pretend this was authorized." His hand dropped from the table. "So that's it?" "No, what comes next is responsibility." "You expect me to thank you for destroying me?" "I did not create those invoices." "You could stop this." "Only by becoming part of it." He stared at me for a long time. Then the desperation disappeared behind something colder. "When this is over," he said, "you won't have a son." I wanted to tell him not to say it. I wanted to take the folder, sign the page, and buy back the relationship he was threatening to remove. Instead, I closed the folder and pushed it toward him. "If being your mother requires me to lie for you," I said, "then you have already taken that relationship away." He stood and walked out. The unsigned statement remained on the table. For the first time in Adrian's life, begging had not rescued him from the truth. After I refused, the remaining consequences unfolded without my direction. Mercer Cold Chain formally removed Adrian as president. Greyhaven entered liquidation. Its primary development property was taken through the lender's enforcement process, and Adrian's personal assets became part of the effort to recover what the company had lost. The luxury house he once treated as proof of his success was sold. Other assets followed. Insurance and recovery proceedings returned part of the diverted money. Restitution claims addressed the rest. The evidence was submitted through the required legal channels. I did not ask anyone to punish Adrian more severely because he had humiliated me. I also did not ask anyone to protect him because he was my son. When his lawyers could no longer overcome the accounting records, banking logs, emails, and affiliated vendor evidence, Adrian accepted legal responsibility. The court imposed restitution and a custodial sentence. The morning I learned the result, I sat alone for a long time. There was no victory in it. My son had lost his company position, his development, his reputation, his home, and his freedom. But those losses had not begun when I voted to suspend him. They began when he decided that trust was something he could spend without permission. Mercer Cold Chain survived. There were no mass layoffs. Medical deliveries continued. The company completed the facility work Adrian had used as cover for the false invoices. Employees who cooperated with the investigation kept their positions and received formal protection from retaliation. Naomi helped recover stability, but she refused to become another unchecked executive. She insisted on the same controls for herself that she had demanded for Adrian. That mattered to me. The company could not heal by simply finding a more trustworthy person to hold unlimited authority. It needed a system that did not depend on one family's private promises. I amended the succession structure governing my shares. My controlling interest would eventually transfer into a stewardship trust designed to protect the company's mission, employees, and independent oversight. No relative would automatically inherit executive control, not even Adrian, especially not Adrian. For months, he refused direct contact with me. I did not chase him. I sent one message through his lawyer. It contained no offer of money and no promise to make his sentence easier. I told him that I loved him, that I would speak with him when he was ready, and that any future relationship would have to begin with the truth. Then I waited without surrendering the boundary. A year after Adrian walked into my kitchen demanding $5 million, I sat at the same table reviewing the final governance documents for Mercer Cold Chain. The house had not changed much. The cabinets were still worn. My old car was still in the driveway. The tiles Adrian had mocked still covered the kitchen floor. I no longer saw any of those things through his contempt. They were not evidence that I was poor, weak, or incapable of understanding the world he believed belonged to him. They were choices. I had spent my life building wealth without needing it to announce itself. The company now had independent executive leadership. Naomi remained chief financial officer, supported by stronger reporting protections and outside review. Related party transactions required mandatory disclosure. Large payments could no longer be divided to avoid scrutiny without triggering an automatic alert. Most importantly, the family name no longer guaranteed authority. Thomas's photograph still stood in my study, but I had stopped asking what he would have done in my place. Loving my husband's memory did not require living forever beneath decisions we had made when Adrian was younger and the dangers were smaller. I knew what stewardship required now. Several weeks before the governance documents were finalized, I received a letter from Adrian. It was the first communication from him that contained no request. He did not ask for money. He did not ask me to contact a lawyer, director, lender, or judge. He did not blame Naomi. He wrote that he had spent months insisting I destroyed his life because that was easier than admitting he had built his life on authority he never truly owned. It was not a complete apology. It did not repair the missing money, erase the beer incident, or restore trust. But it was the first time he had described his choices without handing them back to me. I answered carefully. I told him I was willing to continue writing. I did not promise him a position in the company. I did not promise him an inheritance. I did not promise that our relationship would return to what it had been. What it had been was part of the problem. If we built anything in the future, it would have to be different, slower, honest, free from financial dependence and emotional threats. I signed the final stewardship document and placed my pen beside the glass of water on the table. For a moment, I looked at the chair where Adrian had sat with the folder containing his demand. The chair was empty. That emptiness still hurt. Freedom did not erase grief. Boundaries did not transform betrayal into something painless. I still loved my son, and I still mourned the years we had lost to his entitlement and my enabling. But the empty chair no longer frightened me into surrender. The company was protected. Its employees were protected. The truth was protected. And finally, so was I. I thought about the night I had knelt on that floor with a fever while Adrian watched me wipe away the beer he had thrown. He believed that moment proved I would always clean up after him. He was wrong. The floor was clean. But for the first time in my life, I understood that I was no longer required to kneel.